Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. This week we're coming at you with two reviews for two new releases records. I combined the words for the sake of efficiency, and then I explained it because that's efficient.
It's a slow week. It's a slow week when the Jams and Tea podcast are covering their second Viagra Boys album.
A slow week, but still two releases that are getting a whole lot of attention. Both of them are doing very well critically, very highly rated, both of them on Rate Your Music. So good, releases with no shortage of things to talk about at least.
No, absolutely.
And this week, have an exciting little record club for you. We're going to be talking about Slipknot because
why not?
Because why not? I mean, we've talked about so
why
many
not
bands.
With the K-N-O-T?
Yeah.
Why not? We have talked about many.
You didn't let that one slip by.
Oh, God. And, of course, we have with us Jakob Sanchez this week, returning. August is taking a little bit of a mental health break. So for his sake, we have replaced him with the nearest available friend of the podcast. Welcome back to the show. I don't know if I actually clarified that the record we're going to be talking about with the record club is Slipknot's Iowa, very specifically. So rounding out all of those edgy jams and teenage years records.
Absolutely.
Another great installment.
A satisfying week for us as well. Like just a couple of days ago, from when this goes out, we put out our final episode in the Björk retrospective. We discussed, Jake and I talked about Utopia, her most recent record, a record that is woefully under discussed and fairly underrated as well. A record that we were glad to give some shine to. Jake's favorite Björk album. That was a really good conversation. I thought I was really proud of that one, and so you can go and check that out by heading over to the channel page and checking out the Björk retrospective playlist, which is finally complete. And we will be continuing with a new retrospective in a couple of weeks' time on the National, which we're very excited to get started with doing. I think that's basically all.
That's not totally it, because you have put up recently your Yola Tango video.
That's okay. Lots of great stuff on the channel recently. I put up a video that I'm very proud of on ranking the discography of Yola Tango, one of my absolute favorite bands. You can go and check that out as well. We did a great record club the other day on Phoebe Bridges' Stranger in the Alps, which is Jams and Tea classic. Just everything you'd want from a Jams and Tea record club: emotional storytelling and intimate revelations and nearly crying. It's a great, and Phoebe Bridges, it's a great album and a great record club that we're very proud of. However, let's get into this week's episode, and of course, as we do per usual, we're going to start by talking about what we have been listening to in the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
Well, another week where I was looking forward to this segment because a whole lot, and first of which I'm going to talk about something that ties back into what you just spoke on, which is Yola Tango. Your video is simply so fantastic that it led me down my own little Yola Tango rabbit hole. They have some EPs that are particularly highly rated that I needed to check out anyway, so everything just kind of coalesced in that, and I went and listened to I Can Hear the Heart Beating as one, and then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out again, just because love those records, and then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out has slowly become one of my favorite albums of all time. But the discovery this week that I want to talk about is I have to co-sign your designation of a particularly underrated Yola Tango release, that being Summer Sun. I listened to this album just because it sounded like it was a continuation of a lot of the ideas and sounds that I found interesting on And Then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out from your description in the video. And honestly, perfect way of putting it. God, I think this album is just fucking terrific. I think this is my second favorite album of theirs that I've heard thus far, in fact.
Sweet
mainly
vindication.
because, and I will say, I think that a little bit of my reluctance to sort of dive deeper into this band is sort of the esteem that I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One is held in is sort of like kind of an obstruction in my brain, just because I do really love that album, but there is also a lot of like reservations about it and structural issues that I have with it that hold me at a considerable distance from truly wholeheartedly loving it, maybe as much as some of my other more preferred releases of the band. And I think that that album's high esteem has sort of led it to consume the discography and the discussion thereof so much so that it feels like almost like, oh, well, if this is the peak, then it doesn't really feel like this is going to be a band that I'm going to necessarily really fuck with if this is what is so often considered the pinnacle. But as Riley perfectly demonstrated in his video, is that Yo La Tengo are an amazingly multifaceted band with tons of releases that deserve just a lot more shine. And one thing that I can say about Summer Sun is that, like, fundamentally, it is just front to back a super compelling, super solid record with no tiny little bugbears. There's no songs on here that I really feel like are significantly lesser. Even those sort of piano loop tracks that you talked about as being the limit of your criticisms with that record are songs that I really enjoy as well. It also has amazing fucking highlights on it, like the incredible Today Is the Day. I can only co-sign that as being one of the best songs the band has ever put out. I also just really love Let's Be Still, and I really love Don't Have to Be So Sad too. I really got to stick up for those. And Little Eyes, Season of the Shark, just really great, really moody, kind of nocturnal tracks that feel like, honestly, it feels like Summer Sun should be the album that precedes And Then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out, because it's like a perfect magic hour album, a perfect like sunset album, and then Nothing is what comes after that. And it's sort of like there's like a flawless transition of particular twilight energy that it just is super great on there. And if maybe like you, like me, were like, you know, maybe you couldn't fully get into some other records in this band's discography, I would highly recommend Summer Sun, just because this is such a fundamental meat and potatoes. There's nothing that's like unfriendly or weird or wiry about this. It's an album that's very easy to enjoy. And I've listened to it like 4 times this week. A perfect driving album.
I'm so stoked that you really loved that record, Jake. I thought you would like it, but I can't say I was expecting this level of enthusiasm. So that's just awesome to see. I have always like struggled with understanding why, like, it's coming off the back of the album run that precedes it, why it's so comparatively less talked about, less well considered. It is, to me, just a continuation of all their best strengths. One of the things I like about it is that it starts a trend that they would do more frequently in the 2000s, where their music would have a little bit more of an irreverent streak to it. Like, there would occasionally be like diversions into genre exercises that are a bit silly or a bit like unusual for the band, like 50s jazz big band sort of thing influence stuff. Tracks like Georgia versus Yo La Tengo and Winter a Go-Go and Moonrock Mambo and stuff like these songs that are maybe a little bit colorful in ways you don't expect. And I've come to really appreciate that side of the band and the way that it complements the more sort of direct and tender side of the band. That's something I think that they master the balance between those things on this record and the one that follows it as well. But this is a particularly special one just because of how, you know, utterly gorgeous it can be. Like, you have all these different aspects and styles of their sound, the stillness of something like Beach Party Tonight, which I adore, and Today Is the Day, to the more hectic sort of instrumental jams, and then it all kind of coalesces with Let's Be Still, which is kind of just like a big maelstrom of, you know, like at least a dozen different instruments just kind of like going off together, and it's just fucking Gorgeous. Love it. Love it so much.
It's been, I won't lie, it's been a difficult week. I had to drive a considerable distance twice over to attend 2 separate funerals. So I have had a lot of stuff playing on my car stereo in the middle of Kentucky summer heat. So, sweating my ass off. Love global warming. Anyway, been listening to a lot of stuff this week. First and foremost, there are 2 things that I kind of want to build to just because they're alongside Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, my 2 favorite new listens of albums all year. But the first thing I want to mention is that I've been listening to a lot of, summer music, car driving music. You gotta go with some good old-fashioned shoegaze. So I've been listening to a hell of a lot of the usuals, but I've gone back to a band that I never finished doing a full deep dive on, that I've kind of temporarily not halted, but put on a brief, like, I'm kind of relaxing with my really big EP project that I'm undergoing. And I think instead what I'm going to work on next is a worst to best on the discography of the band Cocteau Twins. I've been listening to a lot of their stuff recently, and I think one of the big surprises for me was just how rewarding some of the, like, with that band, you have obviously, Heaven in Las Vegas being like this really totemic, seminal, acclaimed release of theirs. And then you have a lot of other albums that are beloved and have lots of incredibly beloved songs on them, but releases that people just don't talk about as much. The 2 specifically I want to shout out being Bluebell Knoll and Victoria Land. Bluebell Knoll, I feel like, is an extension of a lot of the stuff that they were doing on Heaven or Las Vegas, where they make their sound really loud, really bright, really pop-oriented. And there's a lot of, like numerous songs on this album start out with these, like, really, really, like, static, almost robotic sounding percussion or like drum machines, and then they immediately just get like swallowed by the normal, like, actual rhythmic part of the song, and it feels like an actual, like, attempt to make the listener realize the sort of advancements of, like, texture that this band has undergone. And it's just really interesting to hear them push their sound like this in such an exciting way. It's such a, like, an album that, like, a really underrated quality about this band is that all of their records are just, like, tight as a fucking drum. Like, they're all 30-40 minutes long, and all of the songs are just the perfect length. They don't outstay their welcome, and they all congeal into something that feels really, really cohesive. But
on the note of Bluebell Knoll as well, I think the most remarkable thing about this record is that it is peak Cocteau Twins fucking bizarro song titling, because the song titles on this thing are like that. I feel like I'm having a stroke when I read them. I'm just gonna pick some of my favorites here. The Itchy Globo Blow, Suckling the Mender, Spooning Good Singing Gum, A Kissed Out Red Float Boat, and the immortal closer, Alla Megalust Burls Forever.
I mean, this is a band that had, like, one of their best songs was called Ooming Mock. Like, I mean, just, like, I don't know what the fuck.
Goo Goo Gaga.
Yeah, I mean, fucking, that's the thing, is that her vocal presence on these songs is, like, unmatched. She's one of my favorite vocalists in all of music, and I can't name a single lyric in any Cocteau Twins song. I know the title track of Heaven or Las Vegas is because you can make out her saying Heaven or Las Vegas, and that's it. That's literally fucking it. That's the only one I know, and I've listened to this band for like hundreds of hours. But it's really just the way she is applying herself in, like, an purely expressive vocal way, and that's super cool. But Bluebell Knoll is great terrific grower. There's honestly like, I think the upper echelon of this band's discography, like the separation of which of quality is like way more narrow than most people would care to admit, considering they have like, God, I think like genuinely 5 perfect or near perfect records. But I think the biggest grower in their entire discography for me is Victoria Land. I fucking love this album so much, and I can understand why it's an album that is simultaneously revered but also seems to be on the lesser end of the sort of canon of the band. But it's because it's like the opposite of Heaven or Las Vegas and Bluebell Knoll, is that it takes the really kind of stately ambient quality of their music that isn't that far away from the release that's, you know, they did with Harold Budd, which I previously would have said is my favorite release from the band, the Moon and the Melodies. It's not a million miles away from that. It's not fully like, that album is great because that is really more of a Harold Budd album than it is a Cocteau Twins album. But Victoria Land definitely tips the scale back over to being more in favor of like a band project. And as a result, it's just mesmerizing. It's nothing but absolute heat in terms of how, you know, slow dream pop can be heat. But I would highly recommend giving that album time to sort of properly meld with you, because it's deeply rewarding.
A Victoria Land as an album is not one that has like fully clicked for me as a full experience, although I've only heard it in full once. But I will say that it has my favorite Cocteau Twins song on it, which is the opener, Lazy Calm. I have heard this song a lot, and this is an utterly transportative experience. In fact, I really should go back and listen to the full record again, but I keep getting sucked into that track in particular. That is otherworldly.
My favorite opener from them, hands down.
Side note, I've listened, this is going to sound like the most annoying thing on planet Earth, but I've listened to Heaven or Las Vegas High once in my life, and in those 40 minutes I understood every single word that Elizabeth Fraser was saying. And then I completely forgot about it.
Yeah, and then when you came down, it was just as baffling to you as it was before.
Exactly.
We know the feel.
You like write all of them out, and it's like some like ancient Mayan text, and you're just like, oh my God.
But I never smoked that shit. Now I'm in the kissed out red flip boat.
I have two records that just bowled me over this week. First of which I want to mention, one that I think Riley can join in on the praise with a little bit, in that the album, I would say right now, is the best album I've heard all year, at least new listen wise, if you discount new releases, just discoveries. That being Ride, their album, Shoegaze Titan Ride, their album Going Blank Again. This was fucking sensational. I've been listening to a bunch of Ride's EPs because a lot of them are held in very high esteem. They're all very good. And then I've been listening to them, really enjoying them. And I listened to Nowhere last year and enjoyed that. And I'm like, man, they also have Going Blank Again. And people tend to regard that similarly, like one of those like big shoegaze albums, like, you know, Souvlaki or, you know, that kind of shit. And I just gave it a listen, and that shit just bowled me over. My God, what a terrific fucking album. I think that this is just a perfect album. Like, my God, the first song on here, by the way, is like top 3 shoegaze songs of all fucking time, and there are like 3 other songs on this album that are just as good. This blends a very distinct wave of really colorful kind of Brit pop with shoegaze in a way that makes me think of like, this feels like a more concentrated version of like, feels like a melding of the first two Verve albums of like, it has the sort of scope and size of Storm in Heaven with the weirder, more idiosyncratic vibe of like a Northern Soul. And then it just blends it into just the most consistently heavy-hitting shoegaze album I've listened to since the Slowdive self-titled. Like, it's that good. I have been like listening to this for the first time was revelatory. Listening to it a second time when driving home on, you know, during like sunset.
I'll tell you what it is. You know, James Cameron at the whiteboard pitching Aliens type beat. Shoegaze, Stone Roses. That's the album. It is.
Yes.
It's like the Stone Roses if they got like like just fucking insane amounts of cocaine and made the loudest album they could possibly make. That's what this is. It's fucking awesome.
And it's so like versatile. Like it's just like, this is a quintessential example of just an album that has a great grasp on the fundamentals of song construction to the point where, you know, like even some of the best shoegaze albums can kind of run together a little bit. I kind of have that problem with Nowhere, an album I love that in its interstitial moments does kind of feel like it's just one big song sometimes, which is fine. It's, you know, that's just, you know, that works as an album listening component. But this here really felt like every single song they just put their whole pussy into, and thank you. So that was just fucking amazing. A new Canon Jake classic. And then, of course, I have the other band I have, I guess, elected to really get into this week. And by this week, I mean yesterday, where I listened to like 4 of their albums. A band that perplexingly I've just never listened to up until this point somehow, which is fucking weird because the band is post-rock titan Sigur Rós. I believe Icelandic post-rock band? Icelandic post-rock band who have a number of like canon hugely revered classics, like 2 albums that I think most people would put in like the upper echelons of the popular music canon as far as I'm concerned. Like, they are as beloved and as prolific as a band like Godspeed You Black Emperor.
And I would say like they're even more well known and even more revered, I would say. I think Sigur Rós are the most, like, in terms of the public consciousness and just general, like, they're the post-rock band in a certain sense. Like, you think about a lot of the cliches of the post-rock genre, basically all of them were invented by this band in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And, you know, thousands of bands have gone on to rip them off. And still no one can match what they do. Their consistency is mind-boggling. And they were, and I know they are for many people, but they were for me one of the foundational bands when I was just a little impressionable kid getting into music. They were one of my earliest obsessions. I almost like take it for granted, like, because I was so fixated on them for so long when I was like not even like a preteen and a teenager. I just haven't listened to them for ages because I just spun all those records ad infinitum. So like I just assumed that I guess everyone I know has heard them. But it was like realizing this week that Jake hasn't really gotten into this band yet. And I haven't listened to them myself in several years. It was just like, you know, I could feel a new fixation coming on, and just revisiting those albums now, they make me so happy. They're a truly life-affirming band in the most, you know, hokey of ways, but still like they just bring it out of me, man.
It's so weird that I got into, in terms of post-rock, that I got into Godspeed first, because in many ways that's like, you're right, on the like scales of like emotional polarity, Godspeed is like that's like listening to like Brand New. That shit makes you feel like garbage. Like Lift Your Skinny Fists and F Sharp A Sharp are just like demolishing records. I mean, they can like still really like, those records are like really powerful in their highest moments, and I love those records. But in many ways, Sigur Rós, they blend their sound with so many other kind of subgenres that they're a whole lot easier to get into. At least that's the impression that I get from them. The first album of theirs that I heard being Kviker, which I'm not, again, trying to sort of assess this band and its discography. I can't really get a full grasp on yet, just because I haven't heard like their two like biggest records. I haven't even heard yet. Kind of
you're going
those.
backwards. That's the thing as well. Like,
yeah, kind of.
I'm curious to see how that affects your impressions of some of those big classic records.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea I had, is that I listened to Kviker just because it was one of those bands that had the sort of genre tags I was looking for in terms of other stuff. And that like that album is like, at least in terms of what I have experienced from this band so far, I would say that that's actually a really great starting point if you haven't heard any records from them, because it's both
their most
really
like industrial record and quite heavy of an album.
It's industrial and heavy, but it's also really dreamy and really accessible. Like, it has a sound that I feel like will immediately resonate with you if you just really like very bombastic music. The lead vocalist, both of them are just fucking sensational. Some of the most beautiful falsettos I've ever fucking heard. Like, my God. But that album was front to back fucking fire. Loved that shit and was like, okay, I need to give these guys even more of a shot. And so I went for, like, I downloaded all their records, and I listened to, in one night, I listened to Hvarf, Heim, Tak, and Valtari. Tak is the album I'd say is most comparable to Kviker, in that it's really like, that one is genuinely, it has like a lot of indie rock in it. Like, it's really, really like loud and big and like poppy. Like, it's dream pop is a really big influence on this band. So I can also recommend that being one. It's like, it's really like, it's a bit less concise. It's a bit like bigger sound wise. So if that's more your bag and you don't like the more industrial sound of the other record, then maybe try this one out. It's a little bit dreamier. And then there's Varfheim, which is like kind of a split album. It's
a
like
live record,
studio.
I think.
It's the first half is studio recordings, and then the second half is live concert recordings, which, if I didn't look that up on Rate Your Music beforehand, I wouldn't have known, just because the live recordings sound really great, and the sort of like almost field recording quality of the like post-rocky sound here, just, it's very in keeping. It's very consistent. That I also highly enjoyed. It feels like a kind of mix of everything I've heard from the band this far. But the album that I started my listening with last night, Valtari.
Definitely their most underrated album. I think it goes without saying.
One of their unbolded records. And I just kind of expected to just put this on and just be like, I had no precedent for this whatsoever. I just put this on, and this shit fucking hit. This is up there with Odyssey and Oracle and Going Blank Again in terms of the best things I've heard all year and the things that I've resonated with the most. This is genuinely one of the most purely beautiful things I have ever heard. The string arrangements on this, which I compared last night, I think I hit the nail on the head of, it really reminds me of the compositions of Max Richter. It really reminds me of the scores to stuff like Arrival. It really reminds me of stuff like The Leftovers. It has that just sort of like big building, gradually ascending quality that just, this entire album is like, it's easily the least immediate of the records that I've heard from them, and it's the most slow, stately, ambiently oriented thing. And I don't give a fuck that it's like a lot slower and more lethargic, which is what I'm guessing makes it, some people hold it at arm's length, just because that's the most different quality about it. But that lets this band exercise their flawless sense of buildup and tension and release. And it just makes for some of the best songs I have heard in the post-rock genre. Like the closer, the piano, whatever the fuck Icelandic song that is after piano.
It's Icelandic for 4 pianos because it is 4 different recordings of the piano that are kind of played on top of each other.
It's so good. And the song that I like threw in the music chat as being like, yo, I'm listening to this band I've never heard of before, and this shit is making me gradually ascend. The second track, Eki Muk. That legitimately the best song I've heard on a new release this year. There is no way to describe this album other than the most outlandish hyperbole. If you are even remotely interested in dream rock or post rock or indie rock or whatever the fuck, go listen to this album immediately. I want this album to be bolded on Rate Your Music by tomorrow. God damn it, go! It's sensational. It's so good. I love it. It also has one of the best album covers I've seen in recent memory too. It's just this like old kind of like emo sort of like photograph of this long distance shot that's like a faded photograph that's like a little burnt and has this like little effect on it of like a ship that's like floating over the sea in the distance. And it's so like, that's exactly what the album sounds like. It's amazing.
I remember the day this album came out because I got my dad because I got my dad to buy it. And this was like, I think one of the first ever like proper album fixations I ever had. And like you, I was like, why is no one talking about this? Why are people, I mean, I kind of get why people are underwhelmed by it because it's by and large kind of more of an ambient record than like a straightforward. It only has really one song that has the, conventional build and release heaviness of their most beloved music, but it has such a strong like atmosphere and textural bed of sounds that, and melody as well. It's just everything about it is utterly gorgeous. I listened to it yesterday, and I had a little bit of a cry in the middle of the song "Do de Logan," which is the centerpiece of this album, which is kind of like, it feels like you're listening to a hymn that's being sung by like every human being on earth. It's like
a human being sung by every human being on earth that's like pleading for God not to blow up the planet. It's fucking
this shit godly. Is like, this is the thing about Sigur is it's almost impossible to describe their music without sounding fundamentally ridiculous, because like,
I mean, I am full Dead Baby in IMAX when I'm listening to this shit, man. Like there like nothing short of that conveys how good this is. It's just fucking I cannot, like, it is one of the albums that I have heard this year where like I feel like all three of you will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say this, but like the second you finish it, you're just so in love with music that you're like, I can't wait to listen to this again like tomorrow. Like you're just so excited.
Good shit. Morgan, anything you want to shout out? Anything you've been able to listen to this week?
As part of my assignment, listen to Gorguts' The Erosion of Sanity.
Yeah.
And it's like having your ass beaten and being thrown into a tumble dryer for 37 minutes.
Yeah.
I thought Considered Dead was great, but like that's how you make your second record, kids. That's a step up right there.
Yeah, that's the thing about Erosion of Sanity is it's like I feel like I have like they're both really meat and potatoes. Like the Erosion of Sanity is just, it's heavier, it's more dissonant, it's more unfriendly, it's gnarlier, it's nastier. I also can't say that much about it that I could say about Considered Dead. They're both just fundamentally excellent exercises in the same kind of area.
Like they're great. One of the things I love about Gorguts, and particularly in this era, is that they are so good at capturing one of the most like fundamental aspects of death metal, which is that it is music that should make you feel like you are dead and like decomposing. And like when I listen to this album in particular, I can like feel the maggots and I can smell the fucking stench. And it's just so like impressionable. Like it's just so vivid. And that's what a good fucking, dissonant, ugly, proper death metal record should do.
These first two albums are fundamentally great, and I'm glad you're hearing them. But it's really like from this forward on in the discography, that's why I assigned this discography to you. So I'm even more pumped just because like these two albums are like a softball for death metal enthusiasts. Like, of course you're gonna dig them. From here on out, though, this is where things get real fucking interesting.
Yeah, like Erosion of Sanity is just like you're feeling yourself like decompose and like get fucking eaten away. And Obscura is like someone's cutting your fucking head off, and you're just fucking thrashing around trying desperately to stop them.
And you like watch yourself, like you just kind of
like
float
you see
out of your body.
You see like it's
apart.
like fucking. It's like you see your fucking intestines slipping out of you as someone kind of just puts a knife across your stomach. I'm sorry, but that's it. That's what it feels like. But like in a good way.
It's neat.
In a way where you're like, oh yeah, that's
what if mutilation was dope?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. This was actually a pretty metal heavy week for me, actually. So I'll shout out some metal records that I really enjoyed spending time with. First of all, I continued my deep dive into the discography of a metal band that is fast becoming one of my absolute favorite metal bands, maybe one of my favorite bands in general, Cult of Luna. I listened to their 2013 album Vertical. And this is like an album that is made for me because I've been so into Cult of Luna up to this point. I've just been inhaling all of their shit and I'm just really digging their incredibly immediate and punchy approach to post metal and sludge metal. And this is a sludge metal record with synths. So it's like a cheat code, as Morgan would say. It's a record that is, it's tapping into the matrix of my brain, essentially. And when I say it's a sludge metal record with synths, I don't mean like New Order synths. I mean like scuzzy, dirty, really fucking like gnarly synths. I mean like buzzsaw synths types of shit. And they're not like super dominant on the record either. They're more of just a flavor that is added to these tracks rather than a focal point, that they do come to the fore at certain points. There's occasional flashes of like vague kind of dub influence on parts of this record as well, and kind of like early 2010s EDM. Not, again, very subtle flavors. It's still a sludge metal record through and through. The thing about Cult of Luna is that every Cult of Luna album has like a song that is like an amazing song that's like 15 to 20 minutes long and just blows your mind. And this is no exception. This album has Vicarious Redemption, which is a 19-minute epic that is easily one of their best songs. The Weapon as well is fucking just amazing. And in some ways, the record is somewhat hampered by the fact these two fantastic songs that make up like almost half of the runtime are like right at the start of the record, and then it goes into some sort of moodier elements after that. But it does kind of really finish really, really strong with the fantastic In Awe Of, and it has some moodier and stranger highlights throughout the midsection that a record like The Long Road North kind of has as well, that add a good amount of, I guess, variation to the whole thing. But yeah, another swing and home run for Cult of Luna, Vertical. I highly recommend this, especially if any of the ways I've described it sound appealing to you. Another record that I got to this week that I have waited far too long to listen to, and Jake will be thrilled to hear this, Panopticon's album Roads to the North. I don't know why I hadn't got around to this one yet, especially considering that basically the best first listen I've had. No, not basically, definitely the best first listen I've had all year was Autumn Eternal, which I listened to, fun fact, for the first time on New Year's Day. So I started off my New Year's Day with a first listen that hasn't even been remotely approached yet. But Rose to the North is, I mean, it's just more of the juice. It's just, you can't, I don't, it's honey. It's beautiful. One thing I noticed about it is that it has more of a bluegrass focus, which I know is a big part of Panopticon's sound in general, but it comes to the fore more here, I think, than it does on records like Autumn Eternal or And Again Into the Light. I mean, to the point which you have like a song like One Last Fire, which is like not even metal at all. Yes. It's just straight bluegrass. Fucking, and it's really like energetic and fast paced as well. It feels like it's fucking sick shit, to be honest. But it also has the incredible opening duo of the echoes of a disharmonic even song and my favorite song on here, Where Mountains Pierce the Sky. Just a classic Panopticon song. So heavy, so good, so sick. Great stuff, and well paced as well. It doesn't quite have the kind of just ear tightness of a record like Autumn Eternal or And Again Into the Light, but it offers some more varied flavors that I think add up to a quite holistically satisfying and a real kind of journey of an experience as well. Like you definitely feel like you are in transit while you're listening to this. So I think it's got a fitting title. And you've got that kind of iciness that you would expect from a Panopticon record as well. It very much evokes that wintry landscape on the cover. So this was something I really, really wanted to get around to quickly, and it has reinvigorated me to listen to their big double album as well from 2018, Scars of Man. I'm going to make that a high priority listen just because I really like the more sort of acoustic or more bluegrassy sort of stylings that were peppered through this record, and I want to see, I'm very curious to see how the deliberate loud side, quiet side structure of that album situates those two sounds. So I'm going to make that a high priority.
That as well. That's my second favorite Panopticon album, but it's also an album where I could totally see just the second half just kind of not killing it, but just kind of being a sticking point for you or somebody else. So I'm eager to see as well, now that you've kind of torn your way through most of the canon Panopticon albums.
Yeah, I can't recommend that enough. And I'm going to wrap it up there because those are the real big highlights of the week. I did listen to a lot of other things. I listened to a really good drone record from an artist called Callie Malone called Living Torch that I recommend. There's not much for me to say about it. It's a very straightforward, short drone record, but it really left an impression. So check that out as well, I would say. But yeah, most of my week was dominated by metal in some form, a good deal of which we're going to talk about either in this episode or in our record club this week. So I'll save that for those sections. Jacob, what do you want to shout out some records that you've encountered recently that you really left an impression on you or that you want to talk about?
I admittedly haven't listened to much music this week, but I wanted to shout out a record, like, because we were talking favorite first listens of the year, like that I've listened to since the last time I was here. This is my favorite first listen of the year. I know y'all are big fans of this band, the Mars Volta, Deloused, and the Comatorium. That's 100% my favorite first listen so far this year. I thought this shit was, I swear to God, this shit only gets better with every single fucking listen. I think I may finally enter a prog arc. This shit makes me believe in prog. Even though, like, at one point my favorite band was Pink Floyd, but I didn't like discover anything beyond there. I mean, I've listened to the first 3 Mars Volta records, and I think they're all fantastic. But Deloused is without a doubt my favorite. I think it just has that perfect fusion of different genres of ambience, of prog, of Latin music, of salsa. I just, like, every single track, I was like, Jesus Christ, what are they going to do next? And they would just blow me away again and again. And Cicatriz ESP is my favorite song I've listened to for the first time this year as well.
Great fucking choice. That's one of my 10 favorite albums of all time. Fuck
Oh,
yeah.
it's so-
Fucking Mars Volta fans be like, my favorite track is.
I also got tickets to see their reunion show, so I'm in Boston. So I'm
New Mars Volta on the horizon, baby.
yes, very excited. I'll be finishing up their discography this month too. In terms of new shit that I've heard too, I listened to a band, one of my best friends, one of their favorite bands, the New Pornographers, Mass Romantic. The fucking songs on here are just goddamn like pop masterpieces. Nico Case is one of the greatest voices in this genre, and Dan Behar, of course. It's Dan Behar.
Such a sick band. I'm so pleased you enjoyed that record. Not to dissuade you from checking out more of their stuff. It's probably my favorite album of theirs, Mass Romantic. But they're a very consistent band. Actually, they haven't really missed at all. Twin Cinema's great too. Electric Version, love that album. I also will shout out Challengers is an underrated record, as is Brill Bruisers. Just a really great power pop band. And I mean, who doesn't want to check out a band called the New Pornographers? I mean, it's just a really, really sick shit featuring the guy from Destroyer and Nico Case. Like, come on.
Exactly.
Okay, well then, let's get into our first review of the day. And I think it makes sense to do this one first and just sort of build up to the biggie. Wormrot are a Singaporean grindcore band that have been around for a while. You know, the funny thing about Wormrot as a grindcore band is that grindcore is this genre, right, that's known sort of historically for blasting heavy power violence associated sort of like, you know, bursts of 30-second to a minute energy, like really, really fast-paced and short tracks, very sort of like hardcore punk, I think, taken to its logical endpoint. And yet this is a band that writes these very short and very violent pieces of music and don't really release albums all that often. It seems as though like for music that sounds so, and this is the thing about grindcore, it's music that may sound like effortless or like maybe even, if you're being less charitable, low effort in terms of composition, but it's actually incredibly intricate. And if you like spend, you know, any real substantial amount of time with a great grindcore album, you'll begin to appreciate how intricate the songs actually are, in terms of the fact that even a song that's 30 seconds long can have ideas that are actually, you know, well constructed and pieced together to have this piece of music that leaves an impact. It's not just loudness for the sake of it, as I think that grindcore can be less charitably described. It's not just like making noise, as much noise as possible in as short amount of a time as possible. It's about, you know, stretching what we think of as composition in metal to its like most extreme limit by making a composition that is as intricate and complex as possible in the shortest amount of time as possible. So it's kind of like the inverse of, well, not the inverse, but it's kind of like the other side of the coin to progressive metal, right? Where instead of trying to extend your ideas into these lengthy, huge, swirling and outward reaching pieces, you're taking that same density of ideas and you're really kind of just bringing it all together and just making it more compact, as compact as possible. And part of the effect of that as a result is punk adjacent music that has a particular violence to it and a particular impact that is, you know, not something that you really get elsewhere very much. It's reflected, I think, in the fact that Wormrot's album titles are short one-word titles that are things like Abuse, Dirge, Voices, and here we have their fourth album, Hiss. Their first album in 6 years, it should be said. And I mean, for my money, though I'm no hardcore punk scholar, for my money, this is basically everything you could want from a grindcore record. This is the immaculate composition. This is the density of arrangements and instrumentation. This is the ferocity of performances. This is the flow. I mean, if you think about it, it's difficult to create a record that flows well when you have a lot of songs that are just 30 seconds long and end in silence. Like, it's going to be difficult to make something that doesn't just feel like it's jagged and start stopping. But Wormrot, I think, absolutely achieved that here. There's shades of screamo. There's shades of, I would even say at points, there's shades of black metal. And there's even one track that has shades of power metal. There's a lot of variation in terms of what Wormrot are doing here across the 21 tracks of this 32-minute record. I'm curious what you guys thought of this thing and what your experience was listening to it this week.
You know, that part of Donnie Darko where Drew Barrymore is like the most beautiful words in the English language, your cellar door. I would like to counter that with a Singaporean grindcore are the two most beautiful words in the English language. Like it just Singaporean grindcore. That's beautiful.
I was a little worried going into this record personally, just because the last album that we covered on this show that is even remotely comparable to this would probably be the most recent Napalm Death album. And that was an album that kind of ran together for me. It was just kind of like really good at its one mode, but it was still one mode. And no, it wasn't terrifically long, but it was just kind of like, I just kind of don't get too much out of this. And honestly, was thoroughly shocked with how much I enjoyed this album from this band that I had never heard of, from a genre I barely listened to. Because, yeah, I mean, I think the variety on display here is genuinely quite exceptional. I mean, it's not like they are fully embracing a cavalcade of different influences, but they know just how to make their distinct tracks stand out. And while initially on first listen, I was a bit shaky as to how this held together, like as an album listening experience, just because there are some briefer tracks here and some ideas that feel like they end maybe as quickly as you feel like they get going. But what I think I'm able to appreciate more is how tight and compact this is, so that it's able to sort of transfer in that, like, it almost feels like 3 different songs on here could count as one distinct movement. So maybe like, yeah, the song in the middle of this particular run of tracks might not be as fully and wholly complete, but this is an album that's not digestible in the sense that you want to listen to it for individual songs, because I mean, it's a grindcore album and it's 33 minutes. This is something you sit down and you listen to because it's the length of a network TV sitcom. And I mean, instead of, laughing occasionally, you get the shit beaten out of you, because my fucking God, this shit is so heavy. I've been listening to tons of dissonant, like, death metal recently, just because, helps get through a shift. Been listening to shit like Erosion of Sanity, and let me tell you, this album can bat up there with the best of them, because it will kick the shit out of you. And surprisingly, the vocals are like, they're just surprisingly tangible. There's a lot of like gang vocals on here. They're just like, whenever they show up, that's like a rager. That's like a song that makes me long for the existence of the mosh pit, just because I know that shit would go super hard. But
Ducking fails! It's time for violence! We're ducking fails! It's time for violence!
You can like actually make out a lot of the stuff here, to the point where the songwriting is actually a total like benefit onto this album. It's one of the most utilitarian records of this kind that I've heard. And yeah, it has sort of moments on here where it's like there's like a 10-second song on here that unrecognizable, I think. But like even then, that's like, is that a great song? No, but is it like kind of funny that there's just this like 10-second long like burst in the middle that's like an interstitial moment between more significant points in the record? Yeah, kind of. It works in a very kind of backwards way. There are other songs, there are like briefer moments, stuff on here that doesn't work as well as the more significant stuff, like a Shattered Faith or the ending Glass Shards is terrific, but I think the sort of the prelude to that and All Will Wither is a bit kind of deflating, especially because Weeping Willow is such a good fucking song. But there is just no shortage of really great, more substantive shit on here. Your Dystopian Hell, fucking the best song on here for my money, which is Grieve.
Oh, Grieve
slams like a motherfucker,
Grieve
man.
comes at the end of like a run from Pale Moonlight, Seizures, Voiceless Choir, and Grieve. It's like it's not even like a distinct suite necessarily, but it's like a contained run
Murderers
of
Row
that just absolutely gets me, because the thing about this album is that when you might worry that it might start to run together, they'll always introduce some new element to kind of just reinvigorate you or kick you back into the record.
Yeah.
And Pale Moonlight does that beautifully because it's just got these really thunderous drums. And for the start of it, it's just the drums and they're just being pounded. And then this kind of cavalcade of vocal noise comes in over top of it. And they just keep doing this fantastic rhythm that I just absolutely love. And it goes straight into Seizures perfectly. And then you get Voiceless Choir, which is the song that I alluded to before that has the kind of power metal chords. I was like, listen to this. And I was like, is that a fucking major chord in my grindcore album? What the fuck is going on? And it was just the fucking coolest shit ever. And then Grieve absolutely rounds out that run beautifully. I completely agree.
It's gonna be one of those albums that I listen to for like the rest of the year because it's short and it kicks ass the whole way through. So I just have nothing but great things to say about it, honestly.
I have been a fan of this band for a couple years because I was introduced to them via the YouTube algorithm, which is my favorite way to discover music, which is you're listening to a record and then you have like a bunch of suggestions featuring bands you've never heard of with awesome record covers. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, I want to kind of try that. And I came across an album of theirs called Voices from 2016. And I thought, Jesus Christ, this is the nastiest shit I've ever heard. And this came after I listened to, all right, like the heaviest album I've ever heard in my life is The Inalienable Dreamless by Discordance Axis, which is, for my money, still the most punishing, at least in the grindcore genre, at least in any sort of hardcore punk or metal genres. That's the heaviest thing I've ever listened to, because it literally just sounds like you're getting fucking slammed into a wall over and over and over and over again. It's one of the best records ever made. These guys remind me of Discordance Axis in terms of that same like fucking feeling that I got when I listened to them for the first time. And like I love the opening 30 seconds of this track because you're thinking, oh wow, this is nice and this is ambient and it sounds so pretty and serene, and you know, like it sounds like water gently flowing, and then fucking drums and screaming and guitar.
Listen,
and
I was just like on the
there.
edge of my seat, like, when are they gonna they're gonna come and jump scare me? I fucking know it. When are you gonna do it? When are you gonna do it?
The equivalent of the 2005 Screamer YouTube video. And
Yeah.
it is an absolutely perfect opener. And those double bass drums, I'm like, what the fuck? How does this guy play so fast and so goddamn heavy?
And the drumming on this is fucking ridiculous.
Dave Lombardo ass drumming.
Yes.
Joey
100%.
Jordison ass drumming. Like some of the best shit I've ever heard.
Yes.
And then Broken Maze. It sounds like a Black Gaze song at one point. Like towards the end of it. Parts of this album even sound like a black metal record. And that's what really kind of like his voice is much more grindcore, and this like manages to just really experiment. So I'm glad that they were able to like really experiment with this record while also maintaining that same Wormrot sound. One of my favorite tracks on the record too is Pale Moonlight. I like the songs on this album that feature no guitar. like that it's just the drums and their voices. Like it sounds like the most primal shit imaginable. Like you're going back to the origins of music where they would just, have rituals and just scream at the moon.
I'll tell you what it reminded me of is that the last like minute of the Swans track Epistate on the Seer, where like that album just ends with like just the drums sound like fireworks and Michael Girard is just fucking hollering like a fucking werewolf at the moon, and these two things are just happening simultaneously. That is what Pale Moonlight reminded me of, and that's just like there's a primal sort of like beastly energy to that form of expression that is like so, like it fitting with the aesthetic and tone of a grindcore record or something like this. There's like, a certain point where all the fucking instruments you have can't even make sounds on the level of what you're feeling. So you just have to fucking beat it out of you. And I like, one of my favorite things about a good grindcore record is that it can genuinely feel like taking a beating. And in some ways, like it could feel like, I don't know how to put this without, it can feel like, it can feel cleansing in the way that a good beating can sometimes feel. If that is something that makes sense to anyone other than myself. Anyway, the favorite one track I really love is Desolate Landscapes from the back half of this record. This is one of the ones where I think the great chord structure and intensity and sense of songwriting comes through really, really strongly. And the other song I want to shout out as well, I think definitely the best song on this record. I love it when I can say about an album that it has an epic 4-minute closer.
Yes.
Because this album's closer is like, it is almost twice the length of the second longest song, and it is 4.5 minutes. And it's fucking outrageously good. I think Connor said it's his favorite grindcore song ever that he's heard, and he has got some good extreme metal music exposure, so that take comes backed up. But it's an amazing end to this record, and just so full of vivacious energy and just unpredictable forces of will in terms of the decision making of these guys. Like they'll go wherever their musical instincts takes them, and there is a primal energy to it. There is some of the best metal compositions can be the ones that sound the most like they're being improvised when they're not. And I think a lot of grindcore records have that feeling. It can't be improvised because there's no way the band would be in sync with each other. Like the drummer and the bassist and the guitarist would be so in sync with each other if they were just riffing like this. So it has to be composed, but it gives you this feel of spontaneity that is like not something you necessarily get from a lot of other forms of metal. And so that spontaneity, I think, gives it like a danger, like when music is unpredictable, but focused and composed, then, I think like that can be some of the most emotionally evocative metal because it genuinely has a tension to it. Like that you just don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what instrumental idea is going to be introduced next. You don't know how a particular passage is going to resolve itself. And also like, this is riff city. Like this album has at least 50 fantastic riffs on it. No wonder it took them 6 years to put this record out, because you can't just shit these kinds of riffs out unless you're like Billy Corgan in the mid-90s. Like you just it takes work, it takes focus, it takes skill, it takes honing. And this is an album that feels laboriously crafted to absolutely excise anything that is less than compelling or inspired. And I can't give it enough credit for that. All right, favorite tracks and ratings from Hiss then. Jake, why don't you go first?
My favorite song on here is probably going to be Grieve. I'm going to co-sign Glass Shards as being a definite highlight, and probably Sea of Disease. I love the vocals on that track. Least favorite track, I fucking like one of the 10-second ones, like unrecognizable. I don't fucking there ain't nothing on here that like doesn't work or like works less. This shit's just fire. I'm gonna give this a tentative 8.5 out of 10 with potential to grow. I could easily see this just slowly working its way up my list as the year goes on. So who knows?
I don't really have three favorites or any least favorites at this stage, just because I feel like I need to listen to the album more. There's like, 20 however many songs, and they're all like minute and a half long. So like it's just dope. It all rips. And I will give this an 8 out of 10. Also, room to grow.
Right, my favorite tracks are Glass Shards, Desolate Landscapes, and Voiceless Choir. My least favorite is All Will Wither, and I am going to copy Jake and also give this an 8.5 out of 10. Jacob.
Favorite tracks here. I think my favorite would be Hatred Transcending. And then after that, I would say Pale Moonlight and then Glass Shards. Least favorite track. Yeah, I guess I'd say Unrecognizable just by default. I had this an 8 on RYM, but I re-listening to this is a solid 9. I fucking adored this.
All right, well, that gives us an average of 8.5 for Wormrot's Hiss. Now let's move into the main attraction of this episode, the boy that we have been waiting to review. Many of you may not have been with us at the time where we last discussed this band, which was, of course, upon the release of their last album, Welfare Jazz. And I think it was January of last year. It was early last year anyway. And it was a period where I think, there wasn't a lot of like massive releases to talk about. There seldom are in January. And so we kind of just, this band was kind of like, they seemed sort of like a joke band at the time. I remember thinking that very clearly. And I actually remember thinking, there's no way we're going to review these guys. They're like, there's no way there's anything here to like, dig into or whatever. But things kind of, the cards fell where they did. And we did end up talking about them. And I'm glad that we did, actually, because I think that, say what you will about the Viagra Boys, there's no shortage of things to talk about. This is a band that is following heavily in the stead of a lot of the socially conscious punk of the 2010s, infused with like the kind of slurry, drunk ramblings of a band like Ice Age. It's kind of like a melding of Ice Age and Idols, I suppose, is how I would think of them, with some clear influence from another seminal 2010s British sort of punk adjacent band, Sleaford Mods, whose lead singer appears on this new album. But yeah, Viagra Boys are not a British band. I should make that clear. They're a Swedish band, and they are an interesting flavor of this particular brand of music that feel calibrated to both polarize and also to, I guess, speak to a moment. In fact, they're one of these bands that we don't have a huge amount of fondness for because of their propensity to indulge in self-serious message music that satirizes aspects of modern culture and society that are, to us, quite tiresome. Jake, I know you have lots of thoughts, so I'm going to let you lead off on this. But I'll just kind of forecast what the, I guess, focus of what I think is most interesting about this record is an excuse to discuss satire in music in 2022 and why it is harder to do well and why it has often less power maybe than it will have in the past. I think there's a lot of reasons why proper satirical punk rock music is exhausting in ways that feel coddling and not particularly rewarding in 2022, at least to us. But of course, this is a band that has received a lot of acclaim. This new album is getting widely celebrated. So that is an interesting thorn in this whole thing where it's like, yeah, we could say that, satirical music of this style maybe doesn't sort of feel like it works very well in the current climate, but it is working evidently because it's successful. But that's a point I'll put a pin in and come back to, because Jake, I know you want to lead off the bat here with your thoughts on this particular record, which is, Cave World, their newest album, the follow-up to Welfare Jazz. What do you think?
Okay, I wanted to go first just because most of my thoughts are very broad in a general sense, and because just generally speaking, I feel like you guys are a little bit more suited to poke and prod at what this is doing on a bit like more of a song by song basis, or just overall maybe your thesis will be a bit more interrogative, I guess. Let me just start off with the fact that I don't have fondness for this band. I was really middling on Welfare Jazz just because I just couldn't find it in me to really feel one way or the other than like vaguely annoyed. I don't think I disliked that album that much, but I also just didn't really see much value in it. So I at least went at this from the perspective of somebody who saw a modicum of potential in what they were doing before, I guess. I'll be upfront. I hated this album the first time I listened to it. And then nothing changed because I still fucking hate it.
That bait and switch.
Let me just preface this with the fact that I try to make it a point to be kind, generally speaking. And on this show, I think that part of my assumed character on the Jams and Tea podcast is that I'm generally the most sensitive and soft person here. And while I can get angry or mean at specific records, I aim my animosity accordingly. In the year of our Lord 2022, after a particularly long and difficult week, I have no such desire to be as delicate as I normally am. If you like this album and are likely to feel off-put by being insulted for your music taste, I advise you to skip my segment. Broadly speaking, some thoughts. I love that the sound of this album is the sound that most broadly eclipses this album is broken Queens of the Stone Age. Pretty much every song here is either a thuddingly obvious perils of the modern world parable, or the Viagra Boys vociferously making up a guy, or worse, both. Or wait, hold on. There is a third type.
This is making up a guy, that album.
Yes, and wait, but there's a third type of song, a song that lasts 24 fucking seconds long that someone threw together in 18 seconds with some default FL Studio plugins that's supposed to serve as some kind of fucking interlude, and I'm fucking sick of this shit. If you want to put an interlude on your album, put a fucking interlude on it. Stop messing around with these dinky ass little tracks on these dinky ass little albums. Stop doing this. This trend is awful, and I'm tired of having to skip rating tracks like this on Rate Your Music because you're not good enough of a band with any ideas enough to put into your album because you need to just let's just fart around for 30. Stop it. Stop.
I love the implication of a 24-second track that was made in 18 seconds.
I mean, look, for all I know, they can bend reality and do this. And after we just reviewed that Grindcore album, I have no desire to be kind to them in this respect. Look, I'm going to be real with you all. There is basically no discernible difference between this album and Ultramono to me in a macro sense. Creepy Crawlers is everything about the pandemic album phenomenon condensed into one song. That's little more than a transparent diatribe. It's not even remotely musically compelling. It just shouts a bunch of anti-vaxxer talking points you could hear by tuning into a Fox News segment with some bloopy-ass production behind it that sounds like Era Vulgaris on ketamine. Congrats, you're making fun of shitty, brain-dead idiots. Do you want a fucking cookie? There are moments where this album's thuddingly loud, cantankerous production that combines both abrasive digital instrumentation and raucous organic instrumentation that are occasionally, while not entirely my thing, because they are beaten into the ground so thoroughly that they exhaust their appeal in record fucking time, still notably interesting. This album does have the occasional groovy hook or energetic swing that's helped by the vocalist, who I do not like and sounds largely indistinguishable from any band remotely like this art rock post-punk revival wave thing, but he has more versatility than, say, Joe Talbot, but he's still not exactly Jordy Griep, where he can make that versatility somewhat compelling, but can't manage to stretch it into a compelling idea pretty much ever. And here's the biggest problem with this album for me. I don't understand how I'm meant to critique this substantively. Albums like this are criticism proof, where when you don't like it, you inherently sound like a whiny asshole. Oh, what's wrong? You aren't having fun? You don't like subversive, unique music with a voice? Do you not agree with its ham-fistedly correct politics? Why do you take everything so seriously? This is supposed to be fun. Are the rebuttals that I hear in my head, and it makes me want to tear apart my insides. With stuff I didn't care for in this vein, like Black Country, New Road, there was something there that I respected. There was obvious talent. There was sincerity. There was love. They were all obscured by techniques and styles that held me at a considerable distance, but they were there, and I'm willing to accept that that's just a me thing. This has none of that, as far as I can tell. Are these guys actually making this music because they care about the issues that they're hell-bent on beating into the ground, even though I've been hearing about this shit nonstop for 3 fucking years, and not a single band that has wanted to tackle this topic has managed to do so compellingly? I don't understand. They don't manage to do it in a way that doesn't entail them spouting the same 5 talking points behind a thin layer of vaguely British irony. Do they actually care? Did they write these lyrics because that's what's in vogue right now? If your sole intent is to subvert, then cool, whatever, man. I don't care. But I need more than that, and I need more than whatever the fuck this is, man. Because there's literally so much music and so many bands with this exact flavor of self-aggrandizing, pompous, faux irreverence in order to make some kind of point behind this curtain of making blunt, ugly, uninteresting music that sounds like a toddler with a heavy Manchester accent hitting a British speaking spell while watching looped footage of Boris Johnson resigning, and I'm tired. I have been tired. I'm bored. I have been bored. Even when this shit is done well, I don't like it. It already makes me feel out of touch and weird and shitty because I'm not here to celebrate what's on the supposed cutting edge. But where's the edge? What's being cut? What is this doing beyond appealing to rate your music lurking Anthony Fantano watching irony-obsessed dweebs that just want an excuse to have their dopamine glands pushed by some loud, vaguely musical horseshit that says all the right politics and has innovative production or whatever? Listen to a Lightning Bolt album and get a fucking grip, man. This whole pretense of the haha return to monkey shit that comprises the other thematic half of this album, this auditory fart, is so annoying. Reddit tier humor pandering to an audience that knows that will eat this shit up. I don't feel the emotion or passion from the guys on here. So frankly, this all feels as though it was designed in a test tube to appeal to this exact type of person I previously described on my last point. It's cynical and it's uppity of me to think of that, but it's not going to stop my brain from internally thinking it unless I'm convinced otherwise, which I don't see happening. I'm tired, man. I feel like I've said this at least about like 7 other albums on this show for the 3 years we've done this podcast, and then them all being in this wave that I feel that I've totally missed the boat on. Me, the ever willing to meet art halfway person, I can't do it. But Riley, for example, my co-host, certainly can, and it all makes this worse. I don't like this. I don't enjoy this. I don't like being mad. Do you think, this is funny sometimes, but I don't enjoy this frustration this shit causes in me. Sure, this kind of stuff is funny occasionally, but I feel a legitimate disconnect from reality. It's a musical dysphoria that feels as though it's ripping apart my brain. I hate it. Do you think that I didn't try, that in my multiple excruciating re-listens to this throughout this week, that I didn't desperately hope that one or two of the good qualities this album broadly has would somehow hook me and allow me to at least mildly defend or even shrug at this like I did welfare jazz? I'm done. Fucking this sucks. I hate it. I can only say it in so many ways.
I'm so glad I was here to witness that live.
That was obviously something that was something needed to happen. Bravo. In the off chance that there's anyone watching who likes this record still, if anyone's still watching who likes this record, I don't like it either. But I'm gonna try and be a little bit more. I'm gonna try and be a little bit more diplomatic and I've tried to really understand the appeal of this band and really sort of interrogate what it is about this band and this kind of style of music that has an appeal to people at the moment. And I find myself coming up against a lot of the cultural chasms that I have always struggled to cross. And a lot of it has to do with the approach to satire in a post-Trump era. And the thing about good satire, right, is that you should be able to take away from it something that is more meaningful than what you can simply just observe by looking. And I'm not going to do the whole satire requires a point of to lest it be mistaken. I'm not
purpose and intent lest it be distinguishable from the thing that it's satirizing.
I'm not trying to say that at all. Like, I have no problem with oblique satire, but this is like it's like the embodiment of that meme in a certain sense. It's like satire that's so obvious and so like just completely lacking in any sort of nuance or observation that feels interesting, because it is utterly opposed to being dangerous in any way. And look, I get the appeal of that, right? Sometimes I can get the appeal of wanting music that has this kind of homunculus type energy to it, where it just channels some primal aspect of, you know, human ugliness and just kind of expresses it and just allows people to find a certain catharsis through like presenting stupid people in a stupid light and not trying to kind of craft anything sort of artistic out of it, just kind of taking the piss, right? But there's a certain point where that depiction of that stupidity becomes, as a sort of satirical point of mockery, becomes indistinguishable from simply observing a person who is really like that. And it's a thin line to cross. One thing that I found interesting this week is that Sebastian Murphy, the frontman, lyricist, vocalist of this band, went on Tim Heidecker's Office Hours show. And I found that crossover interesting because I feel like Tim and Sebastian have somewhat similar approaches to the way that they draw comedy out of exaggerated depictions of masculinity or delusion or kind of lower echelons of culture, I guess. But there's a fundamental difference that makes Tim incredibly funny and incredibly insightful and incredibly just primally hilarious in the way that he does it. And Sebastian just utterly lacking in any sense for comic timing, comic delivery. It feels as though Sebastian is kind of just trying to brute force these obvious mocking imitations into being funny through sheer effort and not through understanding of what the fundamentals of comedy actually are and what it is about observing exaggerated versions of the most repellent people in society that can make those mirror observations feel funny and just like insightful in some way and revealing of a kind of common thread that unifies the absurd nature of human beings and how easily corruptible and corroded our brains are. There's none of the sense of catharsis that that kind of comedy can provide in this, because it kind of is just embarrassing. Like there's certain points where you don't really know if Sebastian is even, I know that he knows what he's doing, but there's certain points where it's so poorly executed that it feels as though I'm not sure if he's actually in on the joke or not, or whether he just gets a real sort of, all of this is he just gets a real kick out of being stupid. The reference point I want to bring up here, and I feel like Jacob might bring this reference point up as well, is Ween, because I was reminded of Ween a great deal through this. And my most cogent tweet of the many that I drafted about this record, and one of the few that I sent, was like, this is if Ween were bad. Which is just like, it's not a particularly novel or insightful observation, but like what I mean by that is what Ween do in a lot of their most sort of wry and funny and stupid music is they project this, they just depict this kind of infantile, Beavis and Butthead-esque, Mike Judge adjacent inner id of like humanity's laziest and just most sort of like self-absorbed and self-concerned impulses, and just makes it into this festival of kind of glorious absurdism. Whereas what Sebastian Murphy does is the equivalent of farting into a microphone and calling it absurdist comedy. One of the things I've seen that people have said about this record to defend it is that musically it is more accomplished than Welfare Jazz, and sees the band sort of developing and sort of fleshing out their aesthetic arsenal.
Low fucking bar.
Well,
I mean, I guess, Jesus.
Here's the thing is that I find this less musically interesting than Welfare Jazz, which I thought at points had a real sort of ramshackle, like Tom Waits on meth energy to it that I could kind of get on board with at certain points. There were moments of that album that just felt genuinely bold and weird and not like it was predictable.
It was bad Bone Machine, and this is bad Quebec.
So there were aspects of Welfare Jazz that I enjoyed because they felt genuinely unhinged in a way that I couldn't see coming, or that didn't have like a clear, easy to see endpoint. It was just like, what is happening? Whereas with every single substantive song on this record, the joke, you get the joke from the first line of it, the first few, and just as you get the musical idea from the first few seconds of it, and all the rest serves to do is repeat that same bit, whether it's this individual joke or whether it's this musical idea, and just drive it into the ground with utter monotony over and over and over again. And I mean, I challenge anyone to debate me on this. There is no sense of dynamic momentum or actual song construction in the music on this record. It is the most lifeless, rote, just completely stationary. This is basically an industrial punk record, unintentionally, because it just has this mechanical flatness to it. In that respect, Ultramono is a good reference point because that's an album that suffered for similar reasons. And apart from, you know, again, having the same sort of approach to writing where it was just like, ha ha, alt-right, bum, whatever. The thing about that record as well is that it kind of, for the most part, sounded pretty good. Whereas this, and again, this is not going for a clean production. This is going for a really sort of messy and distorted, sort of noisy thing. And that's not inherently bad either. I think one of the few interesting threads of Viagra Boys musically is that they clearly have a kind of garage punk influence. Some parts of their earlier music remind me of a band that I love, the Drones, who are like one of the great sort of avant-garde garage punk, post-punk adjacent bands of the 2000s and the early 2010s, and are, I think, a band that so many of the modern Gen Z post-punk bands take so much influence from, and deserve a lot more love. But anyway, there is a definite tradition and precedent for what Viagra Boys are trying to do, but there's a fundamental lack of effort, lack of dynamism, and also it's like and again, I know these guys aren't British, and we keep bringing up like the Britishness of it, but it is a very like it belongs in a very
They're
British
really trying
tradition.
to evoke a British sense of humor, though. That's
Yeah.
that's what they're going for.
One of the problems I have with a lot of British sketch comedy, and particularly in the like last 20 years in the like 2000s era, a lot of stuff that I grew up with, being, you know, a citizen of the colonies, is that a lot of the approach to British comedy, not the classic stuff, not like Monty Python and Fawlty Towers and all that stuff like from the 70s and 80s, but like in the more recent era, has been one joke and it's just beaten into the ground for like 5 minutes straight. Catherine Tate, Little Britain, all of these like British institutions that I grew up on, the very foundation of this comedy was like the joke is there, like from the get-go, from the first, like you get the joke instantly, and it's just the joke, I suppose, is that the joke is then beaten into the ground again and again and again and again. In these sketch shows, every episode will have like the same set of characters and the same joke repeated in a new context over and over and over and over again. And I guess to some extent, the comic appeal there is like the appeal of slapstick, where you can see the joke coming. The appeal of slapstick is not unpredictability, because the whole thing about slapstick is you can see what's going to happen, and the hilarity comes from the way that it happens and the predictability of it, and just the kind of like lizard brain hilariousness of seeing someone kind of stumble into an obvious and very painful experience. That was a very satisfying aspect of Man vs. Bee, the recent Netflix Rowan Atkinson series, which I only bring up because I also watched it very recently. And it's like an example of comedy where the joke is obvious and very two-dimensional and very written in a kind of physicality, but it's funny because of those things, because there's almost a grace to it and its sort of childishness that is appealing in a really kind of like base way. But anyway, I'm getting really in the weeds here and drifting so far away from this music. So I'll step back from the brink. I think I've made my point for now. Jakob, you're our guest, so I'd love to bring you into the fold here at this point. What's your experience with Viagra Boys? What was your experience listening to this record? And what's your take on, I guess, what this band's whole shtick is and how it lands for you?
I listened to Welfare Jazz when it came out. I wanted to listen to some new music. I thought their name was kind of funny. So I'm like, all right, I've heard some good things about this band. And I remember thinking it was all right at the time. Like, I'm like, all right, I see what they're doing here. Like, there's some nice little post-punk, garage punk energy here that's just like kind of weird and silly. And then I never thought about them again until December, and partially because Black Country New Road, Black Midi, Squid all came out with far more interesting albums that kind of, and I feel like that's a bit of a cheat code in terms of like criticism with this album, or like not this album, but the Viagra Boys in general, because all of those bands have different.
Don't apologize for being right.
I mean, all of those bands do have different mission statements. I mean, 3 of them came from the same scene, but they have their own unique identity. And Viagra Boys, to their credit, they do have an identity. And also, full disclosure, I don't think I've ever given, whenever I've been on this channel with y'all, I don't think I've ever given like a negative or middling review on this channel. Like, I think when we were doing Pusha T, It's Almost Right, I was the one to defend it. Like, no, this is a good album. It's misunderstood. Or like, no, Charlie XCX Crash, that's a fun pop album. I don't know if this is I don't even think I have like a negative review of this record. It's certainly one of my least favorites of the year. Monotonous is the right word for this. I said on Twitter that the lead singer of this band, Sebastian Murphy, he is what happens when Gene Ween is trying to do a David Byrne impression. I got 2 different responses. One, oh God, like that's true, but in a negative way. And then a mutual of ours on Twitter also said yes, but in a positive way. Yes, derogatory, yes, complimentary. I meant that in a more derogatory way. And again, this band frustrates me because I should love them. Like, I got a friend of mine who thinks that this is like the best band to have ever come out in the past 5 years. I like Ween and Talking Heads are two of my favorite bands of all time. And when you brought up that Ween comparison on Twitter, I was like, if Ween were bad, and then when I heard it, I was like, okay, I get it, because this reminds me of when a friend of mine listened to God Ween Satan, the debut record from Ween, and fucking hated it. Absolutely hated every second of it. And now listening to this, I understand what he meant. I don't hate this album per se. I think there are moments on here which are good, and there are songs on here, but this to me, again, like, you get the joke in 5 seconds, but all right, what else is there? Is there a good riff? Is there like, like a solo? Like, you got a sax player on there who's killing it. Why is he so fucking low in the mix?
It's a fucking blessing.
And
No, you don't understand. It's garagey. It's
like,
punk.
But like, okay,
it's garagey like that
punk.
one girl who died in the fucking garage door in Scream.
Uh,
I thought you were about to like bring up a real girl who had died in a garage, and I was like, wow, we're gonna have to fucking cut that shit.
yeah. Okay, so like, and I bring that album up because I understand his frustrations with it, because I think that album is eclectic. I think it's weird. I think it, like, goes so far beyond, what this band is really expected from them. And I'm talking about Godwin Satan here, that I can't help but, even if in its really dumber and weirder moments, and even not good moments, at least appreciate what they were doing. This, though, again, like, okay, so to bring up some positives, I thought the first track was all right. I thought there was like a steady groove there where I was like, even if, again, like, you kind of get the point in the first 30 seconds, you're like, all right, there's a groove here. It's pretty good. I enjoy this. And then there's ADD, which in my opinion is by far and away the best song, because this is the only one that doesn't feel like satire. It feels like this is an actual emotion that this band has. I was reading an interview with Sebastian Murphy. He was like, oh, I got ADD. Everything on that song is, true. Like, okay, that's why it feels like an actual song. And then you have a song like Big Boy, which they recorded at like 3 a.m, and they were pissed. And I mean pissed in a drunken sense. And they're recording the song, and it just like, it's like, oh, it's supposed to sound like, so bad but kind of cool too. No, it just sounds fucking monotonous. The goddamn joke isn't funny. Like, you made up these lyrics on the spot. Congratulations, we could fucking tell. Like, yes, I'm a big boy looking for a big girl. Okay, and what's the point? Like, you're doing the same thing that we've done for the past like fucking 7 songs already.
This is the kind of music that's going to age so poorly as well. Music that's like so full of references and touchstone points from like the current moment. Like, this is why Creepy Crawlers is so unbearable, because it's just like a laundry list of all of these like conspiracy theory dog whistles, essentially, that are very like already kind of outdated, because who fucking is still on the adrenochrome shit anymore? Like, that's so 2021. Like, it's already, and this is showing you like how bad of an idea it is to kind of go down this pathway, because it just has no sustainability to it. It's just bits that are linked to a point in time that have the sort of that maybe people can feel superior for recognizing, and like, aha, yeah, that's those stupid people who think that, and they're so stupid, ha ha ha. And it's like, this is music that exists purely to make people feel better about their shitty little lives, essentially. Well, at least I'm not delusional. The thing is, like, I can enjoy the kind of comedy that makes fun of the kinds of people that this is making fun of. But when the difference is that the best examples of that comedy have an underlying sense of absurdism that fundamentally understands that the things that makes those people flawed are things that are common aspects of humanity, that we are all united by in a certain sense, and that none of us are necessarily superior to others. We all have, Play-Doh brains. We're all fucking walking balls of naive and manipulatable tissue. And one of us is not superior to another group of us in any way, no matter how much we want to think that we are. Like the best way you could possibly like fundamentally interrogate, and even if you're not trying to interrogate, even if you're just trying to like poke fun, go ha ha ha, two-dimensional lizard brain shit, failing to acknowledge the inherent commonality that underlies that we all share is going to render the entire experience of listening to your art unbearable. And the twist of the knife is that I feel like Sebastian Murphy knows this. I feel like he gets this. I feel like he thinks he's doing this. I feel like he thinks he's poking fun at himself as much as he's poking fun at the people that he's satirizing. But that just doesn't come across very well at all. And that is something that I feel like I can only give him the benefit of the doubt on because I've read the interviews and the notes on Apple Music for each song, and I can see his explanations like, oh, okay, like I'm not necessarily, I'm a bit of a fucking playful, childish idiot, but yada, yada, yada. There's no sense of self-awareness in the songs themselves.
If it's not that, then it's we haven't circled back to this point, which is the song's tendencies to, and I quote, make up a guy. Punk Rock Loser, for example, probably has the best hook on this album. And funnily enough, if I remember correctly, didn't they already do this exact same thing on Welfare Jazz on like the first fucking song? And that was like the best song on that album. It's basically the same shit. It's just they literally proceed throughout their time with no dynamic instrumentation, just make up this punk rock loser character. And it's like, the bit is that he thinks that he's tough, but he's really lame. And that's every line. It's like, oh, I got 7-Up and codeine in my cup. And it's like, who is this? I don't even like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, fucking sure, man. I mean, I guess this is funny if I was like 2.
I can kind of get it because there's a bit of a like in my notes I'm trying to play fair ball here and like kind of defend it. Like, okay, I think it's kind of going for like an Iggy Pop sort of parody, like where it's like because he had these like really disturbingly weird songs about like where he'd talk about like picking up teenagers or whatnot, and then like I get is it trying to go for that? But again, the instrumentation is just so monotonous that it kind of like ruins any sort of like joke that they're sort of going for.
I'll tell you when I knew that this record was just not going to work for me. It was in the very first song, actually, which is one of the less interminable songs lyrically, I suppose, although it's pretty rote. And I just realized like they're just writing this. They're just what they're doing is they're rewriting the song "Excitable Boy" by Warren Zevon, like this kind of, which is a great song, like a sort of wry satirical parody that talks about how people are really happy to overlook obvious kind of evil when it comes in the form of a cute little boy who is like, impressing all the adults and like doing all these things and has all these hopes and a bright future imposed on him that, makes him able to get away with heinous things like rape and awful, disgusting acts of violence. That's a song that Warren Zevon wrote in the mid-70s. And it's like one of the most fucking cutting and just brutal songs that has ever been written on that subject of the way that kind of privilege can you sort of provide you with an out to do heinous things. And this song comes along to do the same bit, but it's just like dumbed down to the point where it's almost like Sebastian is so concerned that his audience won't get what he's trying to say that he has to, express it. Like, tell you what, this is like those 5 levels of explanation concept videos where you have someone who comes on, like an expert who comes along and explains quantum physics to a 5-year-old, and then to a teenager, and then to a high school graduate, and then to a college graduate, and then to like a fucking professor, right? And like the Warren Zevon song is like, you know, explaining white privilege to an adult, and this whole album is like explaining white privilege to a fucking toddler.
I would also like to add on to the fact that I saw a tweet today that really made me think about some stuff, and it was the fact that it was talking about character writing in television, and specifically the show Mad Men, and about how the reason that show is great and that the characters are great are because they are completely unaware of their own psychology. They have motivated actions. They don't sit there and psychoanalyze themselves and have arguments with other characters where they directly shout what their correlated emotions are and just like lay everything out. They are a certain way, they behave that way, and they take specific actions to demonstrate that rather than laying it out thickly. This is like a show that's trying to be a prestige drama, but doesn't know how to write those informed emotions and characters, and is instead having characters circle around and talk to each other and explain what their characters are. And it's just like, oh my God, I fucking get it. Will you actually do something with this finally? And they don't.
This band is treating whoever might listen to this album like they are so stupid that they like need assistance to remember to breathe. It's like the fucking Green Book of music, and it's going to be nominated for a Mercury Prize.
One of the things I was going to bring up, Morgan, because I thought you might mention it, is like, because it's a thread that you've brought up in the past, is how frustrating it is to have music that is kind of like poking fun at a particular society and culture, Americans, from people who are, you know, not embedded in that landscape, and it's like being, you know, 6'4" and ripped and making fun of the fat kid. Like what is the goal here? Is this, do you need to feel any better than you already do? Like,
I mean, you fellas ever heard of a concept called punching down?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. Yeah.
Okay, but like but what really kind of just made me realize, all right, this maybe is a band that I think people are going to forget about in 2 years or so, unless they really kind of like do a big old like musical evolution, is that today Hellfire came out. And I listened to it in its entirety, and I was like, well, that is a band with a vision. That is a band with some creativity. That is a band that, even though they have maybe a sort of different vision than Viagra Boys, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is a creative band. And Hellfire does kind of tackle sort of subjects about, like, you know, where humanity is now, but it's far more interesting and far more exciting. And Viagra Boys,
the last song, which is just this entire album, if it was one concisely written, interesting, actually funny song.
That's my final thoughts on that. Olivia, to my friend, I'm sorry. I tried. I gave this a fair chance. I'm
also sorry.
Seeing like Jacob, seeing you like be outwardly negative towards an album is like, it's like seeing Paddington like with a fucking heroin needle in his arm and just like a fucking belt in his mouth.
This is like when people bought Shadow the Hedgehog for the GameCube, and then eventually the first thing they see is a fucking cartoon hedgehog with a fucking AR-15 and Shinedown playing in the background.
Anyway, let's rate this album.
No, I'm not. No, hang on. I'm not done. I'm not fucking done.
Okay.
Don't shut me up.
No, go off.
Because you know,
don't shut me up. No.
You and me are fucking done here professionally. Yeah. So
fucking amateurs.
We might end up talking in circles during this segment, and some of it might have to be cut out, but I need this out of my system. It's like, so the journey with listening to this album, and it was only across one listen because I only listened to this once because it's so butt-chuggingly stupid that like there was nothing else to be gleaned from further listens.
You weren't gonna have like a click moment with with this album.
No, I figured that was a safe bet. The
idea
journey
of that is
the new-
frankly fucking hysterical.
The new Viagra Boys is a real grower.
Morgan listening to Return to Monkey, the being like,
dude, do you get it? Just say monkey. Poop. No.
when the monkey meets
the
the
man.
man.
Fucking just so the journey with listening to this album was initially I had a very Jake-esque response where I was just infuriated. It was like somebody rubbed shit into my ear holes and I wanted nothing more than to just turn it off and go outside or something. And then about halfway through, I was just like, why am I so mad at this? This is so nothing. Like, who cares? And like, by the end of it, I was like, that makes it worse. That makes like at least when it was like infuriating me, at least I felt something from the supposedly cutting edge, satirical, cynical, fucking mirror up to our society record. That's the 890th of those that we've listened to in the past 2.5 years. Like, while creating this record, clearly at no point did anyone stop, look around and say, hey, maybe literally every single thing we're doing on this record has been done exactly like this about 500 times in the past 50 years. Like, the fact that nobody had that thought is enough to break my prefrontal cortex. But now that we're so far past the production stage of this album that it's been released and it is bolded on Rate Your Music, and we're doomed. We're doomed.
It's grim.
Because everyone who agrees and gets a lot out of the satire of this album is right. But if this is what we want to choose to represent ourselves, we're never going to be taken seriously, ever, and we're going to die. We are going to die, and it's Viagra Boys' fault.
It's like 40 minutes of a guy who's like, hey, isn't it like, aren't people who think that vaccines are bad, aren't they fucking stupid? Don't you think? Has anyone ever like stopped to think about how fucking stupid conspiracy theories are? Like, is it just me? Or is this shit so fucking dumb? Like, is no one else?
And then you're just like, oh, well, I think there's a psychological foundation for why conspiracy theories are. And another thing, don't you think hipsters are annoying? I mean, yeah, but like, and I also think that maybe anti-vaxxing is like, maybe that shows a fundamental distrust between people and bodies. Did you think that maybe that if a baby criminal was a baby and a criminal that would be bad?
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Who gives a fuck? Is it nature or nurture? Who cares? Who cares? What does it matter? We're never going to find out.
You guys are not going to believe
We haven't
this.
figured it out by now.
You guys are not going to believe. I just saw this video on the internet of this guy who thinks that they were putting things in the water to make the frogs gay. Like, you're not gonna believe this shit.
I also read that same guy said that the Sandy Hook shooting was fabricated. Isn't that terrible? We know we're living it. Whatever happened to the idea that comedy is tragedy plus time? Where has the time been? These things happened yesterday. What is
Dividing by zero?
It's happening now.
These things happened yesterday, and we're already fucking tired of hearing about them.
Yeah.
There's nothing you're gonna offer us that's gonna be in any way just adding to our lives. We want to engage in art so we can
Adam McKay of music
from the fucking hellscape. We don't want to engage in art so we can see the hellscape in a new form. Like we have enough of the hellscape in our everyday lives. Give us something that lets us escape that.
I get an escape from an album called Hellfire. I get more escape from that. This album makes me want, like, you all remember me having to write a fucking essay about Black Country New Road and my disconnect from that album. This makes me want to suck the dick of every member of that band for no other reason than good. You did better.
They had an idea. They had an idea. There was an idea there. That wasn't, we're going to do the bass for a little bit and it's going to sound a little fucked up and here's some drums. Shut up. Shut up. My 3 favorite tracks are Satan's Asshole. I don't fucking know, man.
My 3 favorite tracks are Satan's Fingers, The Killers, and The Hospital Bombers.
Yeah. Some of which have now been used.
I give this album a slightly, I hate this, slightly less than Arcade Fire's We out of 10. 2.
Ain't No Thief was like, I didn't hate. Yeah, 3 out of 10.
Like, for all of the shit I've thrown, I do enjoy 3 songs on this record at a borderline enjoyable level. Those being A Punk Rock Loser, Return to Monk, and Ain't No Thief, which is funny because it's a song about a dude being accused of stealing someone's shit, and like he did, but also like he doesn't like being called a thief.
Really bad. He's bad at gaslighting. So
It's
he's
kind
like,
of-
I didn't do it.
It's kind of funny. It's a joke that I think is overplayed. It could be a little bit more concise, but it did make me laugh. So I'll give
Great if it
points
was
to that.
one verse.
My least favorite song here is Big Boy, which is utterly interminable, and also the moment where I'm most reminded of Ween in the least charitable way possible. And yeah, I'm going to give this a 4.
Favorite track, ADD, I thought was honestly kind of good. I enjoyed the groove on Baby Criminal, and I guess like Ain't No Thief again. Like there was pretty decent groove there. I like that song, all right. But like my least favorite track on here, yeah, I'm also gonna say Big Boy. I fucking hated that song.
It was close between that and Creepy Crawlers and the Adrenochrome.
Much like a man who needs to take Viagra, this album was limp and flaccid, 4 out of 10.
That gives us an average of 3.3 for Viagra Boys, Cave World. Let us know at home, what do you think of either of the albums we've discussed today? Wormrot's Hiss and Viagra Boys, Cave World. Did you like them? Did you hate them? Did you think that we missed any important pieces of observation? If you do have any takes that differ from ours, don't be dissuaded by our relentless dogging of Viagra Boys. If you did like this record, we do want to, I at least want to hear genuinely what it is about this band that appeals to people, because it feels like you go crazy when you don't get it. So let me know in the comments, let us know in the comments below as well. Stick around for our record club on Wednesday on Slipknot's Iowa. And next week, we will be back reviewing the new album from Black Midi and the new album from Lizzo. So stick around for that. It's going to be a good one. Rock over London, rock on Chicago, Viagra, let the dance begin.